1884, English theologian George Hawkins Pember, who was affiliated with the Christian fundamentalist fraternity Plymouth Brethren, wrote the classic book, Earth's Earliest Age and Their Connection with Modern Spiritualism and Theosophy. Pember witnessed, during his own time, the earliest stages of the New Age movement. He observed the influence that the spiritualist movement, the Theosophical Society, and Eastern religions, such as Buddhism, was gaining in Western society. He believed that these were fearful signs that the end-time revival of the pre-flood world was taking place. The spiritualist movement, the Theosophical Society, and the Eastern religions, together, constitutes the earliest forms of the New Age movement, or what is presently known as the New Spiritualism. Broken down to its elements, the New Spiritualism is nothing more than a 21st century manifestation of the religion of the fallen angels that existed during the pre-flood world, which was first reintroduced to the post-flood world in the ancient Babylonian Empire. The present New Spiritualism movement is a conglomeration of the New Age movement, Eastern religions, neo-paganism, pantheistic nature worship, and the ecumenical movement. It is the consolidated effort by the ruling dark powers to unite all spiritual movements into a one-world religion under the guise of peace, tolerance, and the preservation of the earth. One of many accurate end-time forecasts that George Hawkins Pember made in his book was that in the last days there would be a reappearance upon the earth of beings from the principality of the air and their unlawful intercourse with the human race. Certainly with the widespread practice of the occult in the world and the wickedness of mankind at its peak, spiritual entities are materializing into our realm of existence like never before. It was already established earlier that the demons of the earth came from the Nephilim that perished during the flood. Shortly after the flood, when Noah and his family started resettling the earth, the spirits of the Nephilim began attacking his family, tormenting many of them, leading many astray, and even provoking violence among Noah's family. And in the third week of this jubilee, the unclean demons began to lead astray the children of the sons of Noah, and to make to err and destroy them. And the sons of Noah came to Noah, their father, and told him concerning the demons which were leading astray and blinding and slaying his sons' sons. The evil spirits that arose from the bodies of the dead Nephilim created a demonic matrix that has engulfed our reality. They are almost everywhere and ready to pounce on anyone who they sense as vulnerable. The Apostle Peter warns us about this in one of his letters. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Collectively, demons' main functions are to deceive mankind, spread false doctrines, inspire revolt against the one true God, provoke corruption, war, and other violent acts, and torment and perhaps kill people through addictions, disease, physical and mental abuse, and psychological disorders. Many theorize that the best description for the physical nature of these demons is that they are interdimensional. They can reveal themselves at will in our own conventional reality, yet they exist at a higher reality than what we can observe with our own natural senses. In the study of demonology, it is observed that demons gain a foothold over a given area or within an individual if they are given legal rights to enter the area or the person due to the practice of occult rituals, the occurrence of violent and traumatic events, and the breaking of God's divine law. This principle can also be applied to nations, organizations, institutions, and religious systems. In other words, forbidden acts by people create portals in which evil entities can enter. Therefore, the destiny of nations can be wrought with disorder and despair. Institutions and organizations can become operations of evil and corruption. Houses and buildings can become haunted, and individuals can become possessed or tormented, all because evil entities were given the legal rights of entry. The practice of the cult is one of the biggest reasons that evil entities are allowed to work their mischief in people's lives. That is why its practice was strictly forbidden by God in His Torah. He hated its practice, not only because it was idolatry, but it also had some real dark power. It opened the door to the demonic, and it was extremely dangerous for people. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes a son or daughter pass through the fire, or who uses divination, or is an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or one who has a familiar spirit, or a wizard, or a necromancer. According to the Book of Enoch, during the pre-flood world, the fallen angels taught humans the occult. Semyaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Armaros taught how to resolve enchantments. Barakel taught astrology. Kokobel taught the knowledge of astrology. Astrodel taught the courses of the moon. The Church Father Clement expounds on the theory that the fallen angels were responsible for revealing the forbidden secrets of the occult to humans. He further explains that one of Noah's sons, named Ham, discovered this knowledge and passed it to his sons. As a result, the lineage of Ham as a whole was responsible for bringing the religion of the fallen angels into the post-flood world. Fallen angels taught men the use of magical incantations that would force demons to obey them. After the flood, Ham, the son of Noah, unhappily discovered this and taught it to his sons. This became ingrained into the Egyptians, Persians, and the Babylonians. Nimrod was handed this knowledge, and by it caused men to go away from the worship of God and go into diverse and erratic superstitions, and they began to be governed by the signs in the stars and the motions of the planets. The Book of Jubilees records that Ham's son Canaan discovered occult writings carved on a rock that revealed the secrets of the fallen angels. He then passed on the secrets to his descendants, who became known as the Canaanites, who settled in the area that later became known as the land of Israel. The Canaanites collectively became notorious practitioners of the occult. And Canaan grew, and his father taught him writing, and he went to seek for himself a place where he might seize for himself a city. And he found a writing which former generations had carved on the rock, and he read what was thereon, and he transcribed it, and sinned owing to it, for it contained the teaching of the watchers, in accordance with which they used to observe the omens of the sun, and moon, and stars, and all the signs of heaven. And he wrote it down, and said nothing regarding it, for he was afraid to speak to Noah about it, lest he should be angry with him on account of it. Cush, who was one of Ham's sons, had a son named Nimrod, and together they invaded ancient Mesopotamia and established the early Babylonian Empire. They instituted the worship of the fallen angels as the empire's national religion. Some historians say Cush was really the one responsible for the monumental project of building the Tower of Babel. Cush, Nimrod, and the citizens of ancient Babylon decided to reject God as their ruler and instead wanted to resurrect the pre-flood world along with its religious system. Canaan's descendants, the Canaanites, inherited the religious system of Babylon, but they also continued the pre-flood pagan system of ancestor worship. In the system of Canaanite ancestor worship, the founder of a city-state would become a god, and he would be known as Baal, meaning Lord, and the wife of the founder would become the goddess, and she would become the Asherah, meaning princess. Some of the Canaanites worshipped an idol named Molech with human sacrifices. People would hand over their firstborn to the priests, who would burn the child alive as a burnt offering to this god. This type of human sacrifice was called passing your children into the fire. Jeremiah the prophet of Judah describes this practice. And they have built the high places of Tophet, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire. The rabbinical Jewish sage Rashi also comments on this abominable practice by the Canaanites. Tophet is Moloch, an idol which was made of brass. The Canaanites heated him from his lower parts, and his outstretched hands were made hot. They put the child in his hands, and it was burnt alive. When the child vehemently cried out, the priest beat a drum, so the father would not hear the voice of his son and move his heart. The Tophet fire pits were located in the valley of Hinnom, near the southern base of Mount Moriah, located in Jerusalem. It is not the idols themselves that have the power to enslave the people spiritually. It is the evil entities behind the idol. The Apostle Paul clearly talks about how in every idol there are demons behind it to give it its power. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I would not that you should have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and of the table of devils. Some say that the god and goddess system of the Canaanites originated from Nimrod's wife/mother Semiramis, who developed the system shortly after Nimrod was killed by Noah's son Shem. Fearing the downfall of the Babylonian Empire after the death of Nimrod, tradition says Semiramis, who became pregnant, claimed her unborn son was the resurrected Nimrod. Some say she even lauded her son as the prophesied Messiah predicted in Genesis 3:15. Thus began the Mystery Babylon fertility cults that spread across the world throughout the centuries and formed the basis of many of the false religious systems. For instance, the Egyptian trinity of Osiris, Isis, and Horus is the ancient Egyptian version of the Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz occult trinity. The Catholic mother-son idol system is nothing more than the Roman Catholic version of the Egyptian version and the Babylonian original. Many symbols of the so-called Illuminati occult fraternities come from the Mystery Babylon fertility occult system. This certainly reveals that those who control the governments and the economies of this world are in turn being controlled by Satan and his fallen angels. In occult Freemasonry, esoteric symbols are said to have multiple meanings and interpretations. One likely interpretation of the fertility occult symbols they use is that the male principle, who is Nimrod, represents the heavenly beings or the fallen angels, and the female principle represents humanity or the human woman. The mating between these two principles produces an unholy hybrid offspring, which represents the abominable act that occurred during the pre-flood world. It is clear, from the symbolism that the Illuminati fraternities openly use, that their plans are to resurrect the pre-flood world. They are continuing the plans that Cush and Nimrod had when they ordered the construction of that monument of revolt against God's authority, the Tower of Babel.
No. No. What the?
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear.
They are begging Lucifer to come out of the abyss. But they're calling for Lucifer to come out of the abyss. Listen to me, people. Satan's church is calling for their God to come into the world. Why isn't the church of God calling for our God to come to the world? Lucifer's people are beseeching him. They're carrying out demonic rituals. They're drilling holes into the center of the earth to release him from the abyss. They want him to come onto the surface of the planet. It is called the tribulation. It's going to happen soon. And you're not going to be raptured and taken away before these things happen. This is why Jesus said, if the days were not shortened, no flesh would survive. We cannot even comprehend the depth of the wickedness that's going to be turned loose on the planet.
The slide hit with such force that oftentimes the rescuers are not recovering full intact victims.
Massive turnout by the emergency services personnel going through their districts, checking. A lot of rolling going on down here. My family lives down here in Orange County. They said it was quite violent. It went on for quite a while, so a pretty good shaker coming through.
A 5.1 magnitude earthquake shook Los Angeles, triggering a rock slide.
This is actually the second noticeable earthquake that this area has had in just the past 2 weeks. And since the earthquake hit, there have been more than 100 aftershocks.
Everything from droughts to rising sea levels.
We're not in an era where climate change is some kind of a future hypothetical. We live in a world where impacts of climate change are widespread and consequential. We see impacts from the equators to the poles and from the coast to the mountains. There's no question that we live in a world that's already altered.
An earthquake of around 7 magnitude has struck China's far western region of Xinjiang.
The earthquake that shook central New Zealand, including the capital, Wellington.
Thousands of residents woke with a bang this morning after a series of earthquakes rocked the state.
Horrific killing sprees in Iraq, deliberately recorded on video.
The now prophecies, these are the unfulfilled ancient biblical predictions that appear to be imminent right now, which means they could happen at any time. Now essentially means at the present time.
ISIS claiming responsibility for the terror attack.
ISIS has claimed responsibility for the blast that killed more than 30 people. We have very few this close to Adelaide that are of this magnitude, so it is more unusual.
Carolina and Georgia got a bit of a shake last night, an earthquake.
A 6.9 earthquake hitting off the coast of Eureka. Already 4 aftershocks.
Chile has ordered an evacuation of parts of its northern coast following an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.0, jolted an area 35 kilometers.
Deadly terror attacks in Brussels about whether the world is doing enough.
4.4 magnitude earthquake has shaken Los Angeles.
These ancient foretellings have no more conditions that we need to be watching for. They really could happen as soon as tomorrow.
Local residents in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick woke up to a surprise when a giant fireball illuminated Canada's skies. CCTV captured the incredible moment when a bright burst of light lit up the sky.
The fire is so intense, it's blackened the skies of Los Angeles.
With Noah, he had to be very concerned about a worldwide flood that was coming. That was a now event. It could happen at the present time in his life. And Joseph had to be prepared for 7 years of famine, so he had 7 years of plenty to get ready. And that's what we have to look at here. Do we have prophecies that could happen now at the present time that we need to be preparing for?
Are there any injuries?
Yes, there's people yelling for help.
I'm very concerned about the spiritual direction that the country's in and the sad state of affairs we're in right now. We've straight-armed God out of our society.
The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God.
We're going to come together, everybody. We need prayer. We need everybody to come together, and we need everybody to pray. I don't care what state you in. I don't care what degrees you have in. We need prayer. We need everybody to come together.
It's like a war zone up there. People finding children, people finding babies.
And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days will I pour out my spirit, and I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord hath said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call.
For lack of knowledge. Actually, will Americans be destroyed for lack of knowledge? And then also, is America in Ezekiel 38, which is a Bible prophecy? America is guilty as charged of saying goodbye to the Lord. You know, earlier in 2016, I think it was around March, Franklin Graham, the evangelist Billy Graham's son, said that we've taken God out of the public debate, and he wanted to bring him back in. So the point is, you know, where is God in this equation? We were a God-fearing country. God establishes the nations, we're told in Acts 17:26. We've been played a very important role in God's plan, and we've been blessed as such with all these great resources, became the greatest superpower that ever lived. But I'm very concerned right now that the sun is setting on our superpower status, and that we're in trouble. We've crossed every dangerous biblical boundary from which nations that have crossed them in the past have not digressed back from them and have been judged and or destroyed for them. There's 4 main ones that I like to talk about, and I think we've crossed them all. One is sexual perversion, and of course Sodom and Gomorrah was guilty of this, and they were destroyed in 2000 BC. Then there's idol worship, which caused the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC, and at that time, idol worship got so bad that they were actually sacrificing their children. They were sacrificing their children to false gods. And this also plagued the southern kingdom of Judah at the time of Jeremiah. They were sacrificing their children also to Baal at that time. And they were also destroyed in 586 BC by the Babylonians. So you've got idol worship wickedness and moral decadence. This would be the Assyrian Empire. They characterize this. And in 612 BC, they were destroyed by the Medes and the Babylonians. And then anti-Semitism, you know, not blessing Israel, but cursing Israel. Look at the Egyptian Empire around 3500 BC when the Moses was leading the Hebrews out of Egypt in the Exodus, and the Red Seas parted, and the Hebrews went through the Red Seas, but the Red Seas converged and destroyed Pharaoh and his armies. So anti-Semitism. So, you know, we have to look at these boundaries and say, well, you know, those have biblical precedent for judgment and or destruction. And where are we at as a nation with respect to those various boundaries? And we not just hearsay, but what about our history with the Supreme Court and that sort of thing? So this is what I've been looking at. And so you take, for instance, since back to the time of John F. Kennedy, the very first thing we did around 1962, we took prayer out of the schools, and that was a Supreme Court called Engel versus Vitale. And then we had, we took Bible reading out of the schools in 1963, still while Kennedy was the president. And that was in the Abington School District versus Schempp course. And I'm not saying it's related, but 5 months after after that passed, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And then you had 1973, a really big deal when Nixon was president. You had Roe versus Wade, which is when we legalized abortions. And at this point in time, you've got about 1 million babies being aborted per year. That's over a couple thousand per day. Remember, the plan of God, he told Adam and Noah, was to give birth to offspring, be fruitful and multiply. And of course, the goal was to raise godly offspring. And now we are legalizing abortion, and babies, about 1 million babies per year, will not have that opportunity. Romans 1 sets forth the way God warns nations and reveals his wrath from heaven against nations. And 3 stages of abandonment occur, and we kind of break those down. I wanted to also go back just a moment and say there were a couple other very powerful Supreme Court decisions. There were several since Roe versus Wade in 1973, but 2 really big ones that happened in 2013 and 2015. In 2013, the Supreme Court judged on Obergefell versus Hodges, which was the approval of same-sex marriages. So what they said, what that was that was 2015. 2013 was United States versus Windsor, when they struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, which Defense of Marriage Act meant one man should be married to one woman, which is the biblical model. One man should marry one woman, the 2 should become one, they should reproduce and have godly offspring. And so that was a really big deal. And when you fuzz the definition of marriage, the biblical model, and you can't defend it as what that case was dealing with in 2013, now you can redefine marriage and approve same-sex marriage. And that's what happened in 2015, which was, again, these are the dangerous biblical boundaries through which, in that case, particularly Sodom and Gomorrah was judged for. At some point, they also approved same-sex marriages. And it got so bad in Sodom and Gomorrah, we're told in, I believe it's 2 Peter, that Lot, who lived in Sodom and Gomorrah, and when he went there, it was a wicked place, but it wasn't as bad as it got. And they were judged, and it says he was a righteous man whose soul was vexed daily by the wickedness he saw. And see, this is what the concern is now. We are starting to see things going on in this country as Christians that is going to make our souls be very torn and tormented and vexed, because we're being exposed to these things and our children are being influenced by these things. So anyway, what are these things? And that brings us to the warnings of Romans 1, really verses 18 through 25. It talks about how the wrath of God is revealed down from heaven upon a nation who starts to become ungodly. And then it digresses. When they become ungodly, they become unrighteous. And when in the unrighteousness, to carry on their unrighteous behavior, they have to suppress the truth. This is the downward slide that's happened to many nations and empires, and it's happening now in this country. What is the truth? Well, John 14:6 says, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So in essence, the truth is there's a God who created us, who has a plan for us, who sent his son Jesus Christ to die for our sins so that we could have not perish but have eternal life by putting our faith into Jesus Christ. Now, that is the truth that's being suppressed. Now you've got, of course, the children are being raised thinking they're a biological accident. There's no real purpose for them. Truth is relevant, this sort of thing. And then ultimately the digression gets so bad, and we're starting to see this happen, that the society begins to worship the creation rather than the creator. And a good quote I talk about in Romans 1:18-25 is dealing from Mark Hitchcock, who wrote a book called The Late Great United States. And he's a really good Bible prophecy teacher for those who don't know him, Dr. Mark Hitchcock. And what he says in his book is Romans 1, verses 18-25, sets forth the character and course of God's judgment against civilization. In short, these verses tell us that when people willfully reject God, he eventually reveals his wrath against them. People can't turn their backs on God with impunity. And folks, that's what we've done. We've turned our backs on God, thinking that we can go on and carry about our affairs without him. And so therefore, we're going to experience these stages of abandonment, which goes on to say, in Romans 1, verse 24, it says that the Lord, in the abandonment, will give us over to the lusts of the flesh, and that would be sexual perversion. 2 verses later, verse 26, we would be given over to vile passions, which would be homosexuality. And then in Romans 1:28, it says we will be given over to moral decadence, which would be a debased mind. And so this is the downward slide of what's going on. And the word used for given over in the Greek is very powerful. It basically can be defined as when you're given over to these things, it's like if someone's sitting on a slide, like a child's on a slide and he wants to go down the slide, he can go down on his own momentum. But if someone gives him a push, gives him over to more of an accelerated slide, that's what the word kind of means. Or if you've got a little sailboat out on the sea and you push it, it goes a little toy sailboat, it goes further, faster. That's how it can be defined. So thus, what the concern is, when you see a society that has sexual perversion rampant, has homosexuality rampant, and moral decadence is plaguing the country, the Lord has already given them over, and these are the results of that. The process has already happened and accelerated. And that's the concern in Romans 1, 15-28. And that's what a lot of the Bible prophecy teachers who are concerned about America are stressing, that, we're already been given over to these things, meaning that we pushed God away. He's revealing his wrath upon this country, and the stages of abandonment are occurring, right before our eyes. The Lord is compassionate, he's loving, and he's just not going to, get upset and stamp off and storm with a temper. So what happens is he gives us warnings throughout the process through three main fashions. One is he issues remedial judgments, things that happen to a nation that should cause it to consider its course and change its course. He lifts up prophetic voices to warn the country that, hey, these remedial judgments are warning you, along with my prophetic voices are warning you that you are heading for destruction. You need to turn about and repent. And then he ultimately gives them the leadership they deserve. And so, we have to ask ourselves, have we been given prophetic voices that's been warning about this country? And the answer is absolutely yes. Dr. Mark Hitchcock, I talked about, wrote a book called The Late Great United States. Joel Rosenberg, who's a very popular author, Christian author, wrote a book called Implosion, dealing with America imploding. There's been other books, The American Apocalypse by Terry James. Jonathan Cahn, a very well-known Christian author right now with the New York Times bestseller called The Harbinger. He's been warning about this country. Jonathan and I are friends, and he's very concerned that the nation as a whole is not getting the message, they're not heeding the warnings, and they're not going to repent. Of course, there can be pockets inside of the nation where they can be revived, light can still shine in the darkness, that sort of thing. But as far as the nation goes, it's headed for a really bad destiny here at this point. And then remedial judgments. Well, we've had those happening as well. We've had the hedge of protection came down on September 11th when the Twin Towers toppled, and from which we entered into 4 Middle East wars in Afghanistan in 2001, Iraq in 2003, Libya, we were involved in 2011. Now we're involved on some level in ISIS in Syria with 2015. We've had natural disasters and economic upheavals. We had the worst, costliest disasters in our nation history in 2005 with 2 Category 5 back-to-back, Hurricane Katrina, and then Hurricane Rita followed. That was August and September. We've had in 2011 some of the worst tornado seasons we've had. We've had the mortgage implosion in 2007, the economic collapse in 2008, the worst oil spill in the nation's history in 2010, the BP oil spill. And really, when you look at it right now, you have to, anywhere you go right now, you've almost got to have an exit strategy. What would I do? I hate to say this. I grew up in a time where we watched Donna Reed and Ozzie and Harriet and Father Knows Best, and we never locked our doors. But now when I go somewhere, I'm always looking for an exit strategy. What if some crazy guy, a terrorist or some psycho, walks in and starts blowing everybody away? How would I respond? Where would I go? What would I do? And I opened one of the chapters in the book with a story about a 12-year-old boy named Brent. And my son's father-in-law, Pastor Dave Barton, and I, we were going to go to a movie after we ate dinner together. And Pastor Dave was watching a family friend's son named Brent, who's 12 years old. And so Brent innocently says to me, after we eat, "Well, Bill, where do you like to sit at the movie theater?" And I said, "Well, Brent, I like to sit in the back because I don't like the big screen right in front of me. It's hard on my eyes." And then he looked at me real seriously and said, "Well, Bill, me and my dad always sit in the back." And all the innocence all of a sudden just went out of his eyes. And I said, "Well, Brent, why is that?" And he said, "Because we don't want to get shot from behind." And I looked at Pastor Dave, I said, "Dave, only now would you hear this kind of a thing. This is not what you and I went through when we were 12 years old. Dave's about my age. This is the time in which we live in right now. And the warnings have been given to us, the prophetic voices, and then the last thing is the leadership we deserve. We have a president in place right now who immediately when he came into the office, he repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2010, referring to Barack Obama. He and his Attorney General, Eric Holder, in 2011 said we can no longer uphold the constitutionality of DOMA, the one man should be married to one woman, the Defense of Marriage Act, which 2 years later, of course, now got struck down by the Supreme Court. He said in May of 2012, same-sex couples should be able to marry. When he signs all these bills that get passed, he smiles and he's excited about them. Now, listen, a lot of the country thinks this is great stuff. I mean, they voted for him 2 times. These are not biblical situations, and these are the types of things that draw down a nation and get it destroyed. And so we've got the leadership we deserve, this type of thing. So basically, we've been warned on all those 3 levels. We've been given over. The Lord has abandoned us, just like we straight-armed him out of the society. And now the question is, are we going to invite him back in? Franklin Graham said, we've taken God out of the public.